Hello and welcome to today's episode of Check This Story, where we explore the stories of famous people, groundbreaking inventions, historical facts, and sometimes even mysteries that remain unexplained. So, if you don't want to miss a single story, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to turn on notifications. Today, we're diving into the history of Villa Tugendhat, a pioneering masterpiece of modernist architecture nestled in the city of Brno, Czech Republic. But this isn't just the story of an architectural marvel, it's the story of a family's ambition, wartime survival, political turmoil, and the fight to preserve an irreplaceable cultural landmark. So sit back and join me as we uncover the fascinating journey of the Tugendhat family and their extraordinary villa.
Very pleasant, thank you. As long as I don't have to wash the windows.
But let's start at the beginning. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the late 1920s, when the Tugendhat family was at the peak of their wealth and power. Fritz and Greta Tugendhat were Jewish industrialists living in Brno, Czechoslovakia. Their families had made fortunes in the textile business, and they were part of the country's elite. They traveled, they invested, they lived grand lives. But they weren't your typical old-money aristocrats. Greta Tugendhat came from the wealthy Lobier family, owners of textile factories. She was married twice. Her first marriage, to industrialist Hans Weiss, ended after 6 years. They had one daughter, Hannah, who stayed with Greta and the Tugendhat family, while Hans remained in Great Britain. Fritz Tugendhat's father, Emil Tugendhat, was born in Brno. Unlike Greta's family, the Tugendhats didn't own their own businesses outright but were co-owners of Brno's wool factories, Feldhandler and Company, and Max Kohn, and had been involved in the cloth trade for generations. Fritz, however, was not particularly interested in the family business. He originally wanted to study medicine, but at his parents' request, he became a businessman. Mies van der Rohe wasn't just an architect, he was a rebel. A pioneer of the modernist movement, a visionary who would later shape the skylines of New York and Chicago with some of the world's most iconic skyscrapers. His philosophy? Less is more. Mies was born in 1886 in Germany, during the reign of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. The same year the Neuschwanstein Castle was completed and Chicago's first skyscraper was built. But his work had nothing to do with the ornate excess of the 19th century.
What do you want from this building?
Simplicity, clarity, light.
Instead, he embraced a new era, one defined by glass, steel, and open space. Mies rejected clutter. He believed in the functionality and purity of materials. He famously said that the ideal dimensions of space cannot be calculated, they must be felt. In March 1929, Greta's father gifted her the land and financed the construction of the house. A month later, Greta officially requested a building permit, which was granted in the summer of that year. And just 14 months later, the villa was complete. By December 1930, the Tugendhat family moved in, stepping into what was not just a house but a vision of the future. A house unlike any other. If you look at Villa Tugendhat from the street, you'd never guess how spacious, luxurious, and radically simple it is inside. Forget heavy curtains, dark wooden furniture, and tiny windows. This house was designed around space, light, and movement. Behind a milk glass wall, you enter the entry hall, which leads downstairs to the main living area. On the other side lies the private family space, master bedroom, children's rooms, the non-ace quarters and facilities. These rooms are hardly decorated at all, just simple, functional furniture, reflecting Mies's belief in minimalism and practicality. The main floor, 241 square meters of pure modernism. This space is one big, open area, divided only by natural materials. A rosewood wall separates the reception hall. An onyx wall marks the music corner and library, and the most breathtaking feature? The glass walls that blur the boundary between the interior and the garden. If you stand in the room, you can't always tell if you're inside or outside. The huge windows make the garden feel like an extension of the living space. And instead of a side wall, Mies designed a winter garden, a tranquil, green oasis that brings nature inside. Villa Tugendhat was not just a home, it was a technological and architectural masterpiece, decades ahead of its time. Some of its groundbreaking features included massive glass walls that could be lowered at the push of a button, allowing fresh air to flow through the open-plan rooms. A translucent onyx wall sourced from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. It glowed amber when the sunlight hit it just right. Mies himself supervised the cutting and finishing of this rare material. An 11-panel Makassar wood wall, a rare Indonesian wood, enclosing a round, extendable pearwood table, surrounded by parchment-covered Brno chairs, all custom designed by Mies. Minimalist, custom-made furniture, also designed by Mies van der Rohe, emphasizing function over decoration. The top floor of the villa housed the technological and utility facilities, showcasing the family's innovative approach to modern living. Fritz Tugendhat was an amateur photographer and filmmaker. Thanks to his passion, we have extensive documentation of the villa's early years. His darkroom was cleverly built into the hillside, with a ventilation system that used vertical vents to pull air from circular openings on the terrace above. It's even rumored that Fritz secretly filmed visitors as they reacted in awe to the villa's modernist design, only to surprise them later in the evening by projecting the footage. A tale, perhaps, but one that reveals a playful personality. Meanwhile, Greta's first storage room remains preserved in its original state. The walls and ceiling are covered with authentic glazed tiles, while the floor is laid with ceramic tiles. The constant air circulation system protected the furs from moth damage, a practical yet luxurious detail. One of the villa's most astonishing features was its air conditioning system, a rarity even in wealthy 1930s homes. This advanced air system combined heating, cooling, humidity control, air purification. And here's the most surprising part, it even had a scent system. Air was filtered through cedar wood shavings before circulating through the house, creating a fresh, aromatic environment. Amazingly, the original system has been preserved and is still fully functional today. This was a house built for freedom, where walls didn't confine and architecture felt like art. 3 floors, including a separate house for the housekeeper. Built-up area, 907 square meters. Main living space, 241 square meters. Window size, 5 by 3.5 meters, 9.8 millimeters thick, weighing 800 kilograms, these windows could be lowered completely into the floor. The glass was so perfectly clean that, on a sunny day, visitors sometimes couldn't tell if the window was up or down. This led the Tugendhats to add a small railing as a safety measure. Cost, 1 million Reichsmarks, 8 million Czechoslovak crowns. That would be about $238,000 in 1930, which translates to approximately $6.7 million today. The Tugendhats lived in the villa for only 7 years. For a while, they truly lived their dream. But dreams don't last forever. Hannah, from Greta's first marriage. Ernst, born in 1930, just before the villa was completed. Herbert, born in 1933, during the family's time in the villa. Ruth, born in 1942, after the family fled Czechoslovakia. Daniela, born in 1946 in Caracas, Venezuela. Daniela, the youngest, first visited the villa in 1969 with her mother. She later became an art historian and married Ivo Hammer, a renowned restoration expert. They now live in Vienna with their 2 sons. In the spring of 1938, Greta fled to Switzerland with her 3 children. Her eldest daughter, Hannah, went to England to join her father. Fritz stayed behind in Brno, packing personal belongings and small furniture with the help of their governess, Irene Kalkofanova. These pieces of furniture traveled from Brno to Switzerland, then to Venezuela, back to Switzerland, then Vienna, and finally Zurich. To this day, Daniela still owns her mother's bed, the very bed she was born in. By 1938, the world was changing fast, and for Jewish families like the Tugendhats, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. As Hitler's influence spread across Czechoslovakia, Fritz and Greta faced a heartbreaking decision: they had to flee. They left behind everything: their home, their possessions, and even some of their closest friends. Within months, in October 1939, their beloved villa was seized by the Nazis. The glamorous living room became a Gestapo office. Soldiers stomped across the marble floors, cigarette smoke filled the air, and the house that once symbolized progress and freedom became a place of fear and oppression. The open-plan main floor was divided by crude partitions, blocking the light and open space that Mies had so carefully designed. The milky glass entry wall and terrace passage were bricked up, shutting out the breathtaking garden views. Even worse, the villa's rare Macassar wood wall, one of its most beautiful features, disappeared. Daniela Tugendhat later speculated that her father's driver may have become a Nazi sympathizer and sold the wooden wall to the Gestapo. For decades, the Macassar panels were thought to be lost forever. Then, in 2003, art historian Miroslav Ambros made a shocking discovery. The missing wall had been hiding in plain sight, used as wall paneling in the dining room of Brno's law faculty. Thousands of people had walked past it without realizing its history. After the villa's reconstruction, the panels were restored and returned to their original place. As the Nazi army marched across Europe, even Switzerland no longer felt safe for the Tugendhats. With the United States closing its doors to refugees, in January 1941, the family fled to Venezuela. There, they tried to rebuild their lives, establishing a textile factory in Caracas, but it never thrived the way the family had hoped. The family grew, 2 more children were born in Venezuela. Daniela later recalled that her father never spoke about the villa. But her mother did. She missed it deeply and often reminisced about the life they had left behind. Even after the family fled, Villa Tugendhat was not safe. During an Allied air raid on Brno on November 20, 1944, bombs struck the Cernpol neighborhood. According to witness, one bomb fell directly in the villa's garden, and the shockwave shattered the glass walls. But the destruction didn't stop with the war. After the Nazis left, the Soviet Red Army moved in. And they didn't turn the house into an office or a command post. They turned it into a stable. According to witness Vlasta Fozdeka, Soviet soldiers tore down part of the garden fence and rode their horses through the neighborhood, looting homes. From her living room window, she could see the once elegant winter garden, now filled with horses. The villa's beautiful wooden furniture was burned for firewood. The curved Macassar partition had already been destroyed by the Gestapo. The glass walls, shattered by bomb blasts, lay in pieces. And the once pristine floors were covered in horse droppings. All that remained were the onyx wall, the built-in cabinets, and a house barely recognizable from what it had once been. A place once filled with laughter, music, and cutting-edge design had been reduced to ruin, stench, and decay. But the story of Villa Tugendhat was far from over. In the aftermath of the war, Mai lost their closest relatives: my mother's father, my father's mother, my father's sister, and her children. They can be seen in the photos, playing with my siblings on the terrace. They all ended up in the gas chambers. Despite this, I was not born into a Jewish family. My parents were completely assimilated, deeply connected to German culture. Says Daniela, daughter of Tugendhats. After the war, the family longed to return to Europe, but they were not welcome in Czechoslovakia. At that time, leftist forces were gaining strength in Czechoslovakia, and in February 1948, the communists ultimately took power, ruling the country for the next 40 years. The ruling party gradually nationalized agricultural land, shut down small businesses, and eliminated all remnants of bourgeois exploiters. So in 1950, Tugendhats moved to St. Gallen. 8 years later, on March 22, 1958, Fritz Tugendhat passed away from cancer. From August 1945 to June 1950, the villa housed a private dance school run by Professor Karla Hladka of the Brno Conservatory. In October 1950, the building was transferred to the ownership of the Czechoslovak state and repurposed as a rehabilitation center for disabled children. The elegant furniture was gone, the stunning open spaces were partitioned into hospital rooms. On the upper residential floor, in the original Tugendhat bedrooms, doctors' surgeries were set up. In the children's rooms, classrooms with loungers for children replaced their former uses. The main living space became a gym, and the technical floor was used as changing rooms. In 1967, when the situation in Czechoslovakia slightly eased and a government promoting what they called socialism with a human face came to power, Greta was able to visit communist Czechoslovakia and see the Villa Tugendhat again. She visited Brno that November at the personal invitation of local officials. After returning to Switzerland, she wrote, "Last week, I was in Brno for the first time in 29 years and was completely horrified by the state of the house. I don't mean that it is neglected by the children's hospital, on the contrary, it is kept very clean and in order. But the structural changes made are so severe that it is impossible to imagine what the house originally looked like. It cannot be called beautiful today in any way. It would never occur to anyone that this is a special piece of architecture." Greta returned to Czechoslovakia again in 1969, this time accompanied by her younger daughter Daniela, who lived in Vienna. In these 2 years, 1968 to 1969, the first efforts to restore the villa and its adjacent gardens began. Mies van der Rohe's Chicago studio expressed willingness to cooperate in the restoration. However, after the occupation of Czechoslovakia by the Red Army in 1968 and the advent of a new political line a year later, the restoration efforts were halted. This was further delayed by the death of Mies van der Rohe in August 1969. Greta visited Brno several more times, the last being in April 1970. On December 10, 1970, while returning from Christmas shopping, she was struck by a car. She died of her injuries that same day in St. Gallen, at the age of 67. For decades, the villa faded into obscurity. It wasn't until the 1980s that historians and architects began to realize what had been lost, particularly as the villa became the property of the city of Brno. The first complete renovation and reconstruction of the villa took place between 1981 and 1985. The brief was, the house would serve as a representative building for the city and occasionally host guests. However, this renovation was done without regard to architectural history or restoration research. The work was based solely on archive plans and photographs from the Brno City Museum. In 1992, something symbolic happened. The agreement that split Czechoslovakia into the Czech Republic and Slovakia was signed inside Villa Tugendhat. A house that had once been taken over by dictators and war was now the site of a peaceful political transition. Daniela's account, in the early 1990s, we seriously considered whether to apply for the villa. According to the laws of the time, we would have been entitled to it. We agreed that we would neither live in the villa nor sell it, but instead, we would establish a foundation to manage it. But then we realized that we wouldn't have the money, energy, or time to make it happen. Eventually, the villa started to fall apart. There were damp spots on the walls, the sewage system was broken, and the stairs were in a dilapidated state. We had the feeling that the city didn't care about the villa. The villa became the property of the city of Brno, which, after long disputes with the Tugendhat family during the 2000s, began preparing for its reconstruction. Villa Tugendhat was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2001. At that time, it was the only Czech building of modern architecture on the list. UNESCO protects not only the building itself but also everything related to it, including the view. This means that no tall buildings can be constructed in the center of Brno from Černý Pole to Spilberg. In 2006, the family's descendants requested the return of the villa to their ownership. Although the city of Brno initially agreed to transfer the villa to the state and then to the family, the state refused to take over the villa, and Brno officials later changed their minds. The villa could not be returned due to a loophole in the Act on the Mitigation of Certain Injustices Caused by the Holocaust, which the Tugendhats were referencing. However, this law only applies to works of art, and the villa and its land could not be considered works of art. Additionally, the city could not even donate the villa to the family, as the current laws would require the city to pay a gift tax of 40% of its value to the state. In 2010, after years of activism and fundraising, a massive restoration project began. The goal was simple: to return Villa Tugendhat to its original 1930s glory. Walls were reconstructed. Furniture was rebuilt based on Mies van der Rohe's original designs. The mechanical glass walls were restored to function exactly as they had decades before. 2 years and millions of euros later, the villa reopened as a museum and UNESCO World Heritage Site. Today, visitors from all over the world come to stand where Greta and Fritz once stood, looking out at the Brno skyline, imagining a time before the world changed forever. The restoration project cost 147 million CZK, which was $7.5 million in 2012, equivalent to $9.8 million in today's currency. British writer Simon Marr wrote a novel about a family, the Landauers, living in a villa. On the surface, this might not seem unusual. However, in the Czech translation, the city where the family resides was changed to Brno, and it just so happens that there is a villa with a prominent glass room there. The story revolves around life in modern architecture, a modern world with modern relationships, which are portrayed as more liberated and emancipated. The couple in the novel is a mixed Jewish Catholic and Czech German pair. The book depicts pre-war luxurious parties, Nazi labs for race research, and even a Soviet rehabilitation center. However, much of the emotions and specific situations are fictionalized. The infidelities of the main male character, the lesbian family friend, these are creative liberties, but many readers can't help but see parallels to the Tugendhat family story. To make matters worse, the film adaptation, The Affair, original title, The Glass Room, was shot inside the Tugendhat villa itself. Daniela, the granddaughter of Greta and Fritz Tugendhat, has expressed her discontent with the book and the film. She sees it as an exploitation of her family's name. For me, it's another theft. First, the Nazis took our house, and now Marr has taken our story. The novel is not about our family, it's against our family. It makes me furious. Villa Tugendhat is more than just a house. It is a story of innovation, loss, and resilience. It's a time capsule of modernist genius, an architectural marvel that has survived war, occupation, and near-total destruction. At its core, it's a testament to the Tugendhat family, their dreams, their tragedies, and their lasting legacy. If you are interested in the villa and the family story, you can watch the movie The Glass Room. Or, if you plan to visit Brno, you can experience the villa firsthand. Listen to its walls, they have stories to tell. You can visit this architectural masterpiece by yourself. Tours last 60 or 90 minutes, and you can explore the garden and take a moment to relax, watching this piece of history. And if you're unable to visit Brno in person, you can still enjoy a beautiful virtual tour in English. That's it for today's episode of Check This Story. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, share, and let me know which story you'd like to hear next. Until next time, keep exploring.